What's up, Key Issues? Garrick here, and today we're going to review Venom, but more specifically, we're going to ask how bad was Venom? So we've gained a lot of new subscribers over the past few months, and you all may not be familiar with our long-running series titled How Bad Was It? So let me explain. This series is not about bashing films. That's just too easy. Anybody can do that. In fact, 90% of YouTube does that. What we do in this series is take an objective look at something that either audiences, critics, or both think is bad and determine whether it is actually bad or not. So we like to think of ourselves as the silent guardians, the watchful protectors, the dark knights of YouTube reviews. So I feel like fans going into this film were split into two categories. They were either excited for it or very concerned about this film. Personally, I was concerned with Sony's justification for bringing a Venom film to the screen in the first place. The entire thing felt forced and seemed more like a way for Sony to hang on to the rights and continue to milk money out of a franchise than to actually produce something of genuine quality and heart. And today, we will truly find out how bad was Venom. I got that venom, not knowing when I'm never gonna slow up Venom. The story does its best to draw inspiration from Venom's first solo story, Venom Lethal Protector, and it does use the Life Foundation and Eddie Brock's connection to San Francisco as a backdrop, but it suffers from the complete lack of motivation for any characters besides maybe Eddie Brock. Eddie, despite being a traditional anti-hero, an overall dick of a person in the comics, is made out to be the ultimate good guy. And this could work in a story with a little bit of cohesion and maybe some stakes, but the entire story is just a paper-thin, shallow attempt to set up a new cinematic universe. So from this point on, we're going to discuss film spoilers, so if you haven't seen the film, please come back later, unless, you want to ruin for you or you just don't care. The very first scene is of the symbiotes arriving on Earth. One of them escapes after a crash landing, and the rest are taken by a shadowy military corporation. From then, the movie kind of plays out like a romantic comedy, if you think about it. Events take place that lead Eddie to find Venom, they fall in love, they eat some tater tots, they have a falling out, and then they make up. Oh, and eventually along the way, they stop the bad guys from taking over the world. It's a straightforward, formulaic, and uninspired script that doesn't take any risks or do anything interesting to prove Venom needed a standalone movie. There are a number of gaping plot holes that, honestly, I can't believe made it into the script or got past all the final editing. Essentially, the first script of a larger cinematic universe needs to be pretty solid to help set up the rest of the films, and the Spider-Man-less Spider-Man universe just isn't getting off to the right start. And let me give you an example of one of these plot holes. The least believable scientist ever, Doris Girth, tracks down Eddie Brock to help her take down Carlton Drake. But all she does is take him to the Life Foundation with no plan or instructions, and then locks him in a room hoping that he'll just figure it out from there. And while in this room, all Eddie does is just take some pictures, which she could have done herself and then just sent him via email or text message. You see her on a smartphone like 8 times. What's the deal here? Is she out of rollover data? Did she exceed her minutes? This entire thing would have been a much lower risk, especially since there are no alarms, no security cameras, or any security to speak of, besides one guy who was like, "Hey, scientist woman, that I see every day. Why are you here at a completely irrational time of night? Oh, okay. I'll go back to being bad at my job." If you had alien beings in your laboratory, there would be round-the-clock armed guards and motion sensors protecting that stuff. Another weird plot hole. When Venom and Eddie are literally murdering policemen who are trying to do their job, Eddie's ex-girlfriend shows up and sees him possessed by an 8-foot alien monster, and instead of running away terrified, her plan is to take him to a hospital run by her new boyfriend.
Not a great plan.
And everyone is like, yeah, okay, let's go. Even Venom is down to go to the hospital like some little kid going to Disney World. Ultimately, the plot of the film is just so straightforward and has no real risk or reward. It's not that it's bad, it's just incredibly predictable, and when you have massive plot holes, you take a passable movie and start pushing it into the just plain dumb category. The pacing of Venom is really the biggest problem. Within the first 10 minutes of the film, they establish Eddie Brock's perfect life, then they strip it all away, and then they throw him in the dumpster. The next 30 minutes introduces the symbiotes and Venom, then the next 45 minutes begins a conflict, ends a conflict, and then sets up a sequel. There's a scene at the beginning of the film where a group of kids are being preached to about space exploration, and a little girl raises her hand only to be shushed by her friends, and they're all like, "You can't ask a question on a school field trip, Jessica, you moron!" Then Drake goes on about why you shouldn't shush people, but then he never actually allows her to ask him a question, and then the scene ends. This movie is filled with moments like this. They set up an idea or a thought, and then they don't explore any of it. And this movie is painfully slow at parts, but then it rushes to catch up, cramming way too much into like 2 to 3 minute segments. If you had to take a piss during one of these 2 to 3 minute periods, you wouldn't have any context for who Riot is, what his motivations are, or what his plan is. Speaking of Riot, the main bad guy of the film, he spends the majority of his screen time possessing old women and slowly walking forward. It takes him 6 months to get from Malaysia to San Francisco. You could literally cut all of that out and just have Riot go into the Life Foundation with the rest of the symbiotes, and the movie would not change at all. You could cut out so many unnecessary scenes, and ultimately, the film would flow much better. But maybe, just maybe, it actually wouldn't qualify as a feature-length film at that point. None of the early scenes do anything other than needlessly pad the runtime while spouting exposition about each character that we're supposed to eventually care about. You essentially have 20 to 30 minutes of nothing until Venom actually shows up to inject any kind of life into the movie. Another massive pacing problem is the need to inject Eddie's love interest into the film and force the least interesting love triangle of all time on us. Eddie and Anne break up, and then Anne begins dating Dr. Guy Bonerson, and every scene they are in left me wanting to, check what was going on Twitter, because it was definitely way more exciting than what was going on the screen. The entire film feels very dated in this romantic approach. The soundtrack is injected into the film very oddly, like during establishing shots, like it's a 2000s rom-com or something. And then Carlton Drake is torturing and killing people in the next scene, and then Eddie Brock is being a real funny goofball eating lobsters and making a fuss, and then in the next scene, Venom is murdering policemen. The movie has no idea what type of film it wants to be, and this lack of identity shows in the off-the-wall pacing. As I already alluded to, Eddie has been softened a lot in this film and has been changed to fit into an archetype to appease general audiences. He doesn't really represent his hardened self from the comics. Ace reporter falls from grace and loses everything because he has a shitty moral compass. In the comics, he's a very interesting character, and Tom Hardy does an amazing job with a very underwritten role, but I felt like they removed a lot of what makes Eddie, Eddie. Ultimately, he's just not a good character that audiences, or at least my audience, seem to care about. We wanted to get to Venom, and ultimately, Venom was the star of the show. Like I said, Venom is really the driving force of the movie, and one of the only characters that works for me. Venom is a character with motivations, maybe not the most interesting ones, but they do exist. He's given a backstory in about 2 sentences, and it's essentially he's a loser on his planet, but once he comes to Earth, he's a god. A god who needs a breathing tube, but a god with an Achilles heel is better than a loser that nobody likes. And for some reason, Venom is chosen by Riot for a mission, like a military operation. But the mission doesn't make a lot of sense. Riot's entire plan is told secondhand by the symbiote with no flashbacks or context, and Venom and Riot's characters definitely suffer for it. In addition to this, it just doesn't line up with what the first half of the story tells us about why the symbiotes are even here. We're told Carlton's crew brings back the symbiote to help aid mankind, but then we also find out that the symbiotes chose to come to Earth and take over. But they only brought 5 of them, and then they plan to go back to space, I guess, to get more, knowing nothing about our planet, technical limitations, or even the life forms on the planet. So I guess if it didn't really work out for them, they were just going to die here. Venom still managed to be a fun character, despite all of this nonsense and backstory and character arcs that made no sense. But he was a lot of fun. He was funny, he built a genuine relationship with Eddie, and their banter made it so that the film was manageable. If they would have spent more time focusing on this relationship between Eddie and Venom, and less on the weird subplots with Carlton Drake and Eddie and Anne and her random boyfriend, I think the movie would have been much, much better. Carlton Drake is not a scary or compelling or interesting villain. His goals in the film seem shallow and flimsy because, well, they're shallow and flimsy. As the film goes on, they just show him doing more and more despicable things with no real motivation, and the motivation that they do provide is not convincing. His entire purpose seems to be written so that Riot has someone to latch onto, so we can have an excuse to have a CG muddled up mess at the end. Drake is given very, very flimsy motivations, like I said, and I would have liked to see him take a more interesting story arc, having him start out by being a more noble character that audiences can sympathize with, and then have Riot bond to him, and then slowly watch him go insane. Let Riot poison his mind, and then over time, Riot would bend him to his will and use his vast resources to enact his plan. I'm not a screenwriter or anything, but I think that would have been way cooler. What can I say about Anne Wang that hasn't already been said about Cheerios? Yeah, they exist, it's an acceptable alternative if there's nothing else, but it's not Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Anne was just a typical love interest and didn't really add anything interesting to the film. There are a lot of things that could have been done with the character to make her stand out. Instead, she just moves on from Eddie and starts building a new life. And in the comics, she's much more of a tortured soul that suffers deep emotional trauma after merging with Venom. Maybe in future sequels we can dive into that, but for now we just have generic love interest person. The action is a little bit more difficult to pin down. At times, it was very well choreographed, easy to follow, intense, and a lot of fun. The scene where Venom is disposing of the police was by far the best scene of the film, and one reason I wish they had given the film the go-ahead for the hard R. Let me get one thing straight here. Venom doing anything, was the best part of the movie, and I wish we would have seen more of it. Instead, what we got was a whole lot of bland action. The motorcycle drone chase scene was one of the worst chase scenes I've ever witnessed in my entire life. The use of the drones as missiles might have been the worst decision in the entire film. Actually, I'm just going to say it was. While it was cool to see Venom take control and make the motorcycle move in interesting ways, it didn't make sense for Venom to just not take over and run away. It was made clear at the end of the film that Venom is much faster than a standard vehicle, and being attached to a humanoid made it impossible for him to get away easily, just climb a building like he does later in the movie. The final fight between Riot and Venom was pretty good. You know, CG, a lot of CG, but I would have liked to see more symbiote on symbiote action. Typically, in a lot of comic book films, the main bad guy and good guy will face off 1 or 2 times. Typically, with the good guy losing the first interaction. It would have been nice to see this happen here, even if it would have just been a bit predictable. Give me more symbiotes for my money. After all, that's what I came to see. So with all that said, how bad was Venom? On our scale of really bad, pretty bad, not bad, good, and awesome, it's pretty bad. It's not the worst comic book film I've ever seen. Making this review really helped me identify areas that were stronger than I initially thought. You know, the action, again, was a lot of fun when Venom was in control, and Venom was a great character, and he and Eddie had great chemistry. When I walked out of the theater, I was ready to give this a much worse score, and ultimately the movie is just kind of dumb and predictable. If you're looking for a movie with Venom in it, this is the movie for you. If you're looking for a well-written, deep film with character development and clear defining character motivations, then might I suggest The Dark Knight, or Winter Soldier, or Iron Man, or Infinity War. You know, one of those movies might be good for you. I know this review is going to piss a lot of people off. As I said in our Venom review conspiracy video, this is just our critical opinion. If you enjoyed the film, then that's fine. I'm glad you enjoyed it. My review is not a reflection of you as a person. So this has been Garrick, Key Issues. Again, Venom, pretty bad. Thanks for checking out the video. Remember to like and subscribe. If you did enjoy the video, it does really help us out. Also, let me know what you thought of Venom down in the comments. And remember the motto, it's comics over everything. And I'll see you guys next time.